The Mercedes W14 is a weak car when it is compared with the cars that has exited the Brackley production line during the turbo hybrid era. All the cars within the ground effect technical regulations were designed by the engineering team under Mike Elliott's watch, and they were massive failures. So, the team opted for a change of brains, recalling James Allison back to the helm. And as James returned, he turned his focus massively on the 2024 car, learning as much as he could with the W14. And recently, Allison revealed what the main problem of the W14 is, and we have figured out why this is not solvable this year. Want to know what the problem within the W14 is that James Allison thinks is the root behind the W14's poor showing? Then stick around to find out. Mercedes knew that the W14 was riding on with a flawed concept right from day one at pre-season testing. Not only were the Mercedes cars miles away from Red Bull, they were behind Ferrari and Aston Martin. In addition to the W14 being outright slower than its customer car, the W14 had some issues which the W13 did not even seem to have on the slightest. At Bahrain, the W14 ate through its tires, the rear ones specially over the race distance. This itself proved that the W14 was lacking a severe amount of rear downforce. But Hamilton and Russell also mentioned that the W14 was the polar opposite of the W13, as the 2023 Mercedes car had a very strong front end, which made the rear of the car unstable and unpredictable. So at Bahrain, Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff called his team to make radical changes to the car mid-season to improve the car's performance and consistency, along with improved stability. Along that process, a shift in technical leadership also took place, with Mike Elliot handing over the technical helm back to James Allison. Following that was the big conceptual overhaul at Monaco, where the Silver Arrows introduced a near-to-B spec car with some actual side pods. Still, some things remained unchanged, like the side impact structures, due to several complications. Nevertheless, the Silver Arrows committed for a change in direction, and all the while, Allison was studying, learning whatever he could and needed to develop the 2024 W15. The team made massive strides in terms of performance gains, but fundamental issues remained as it was, and that made the W14 a tricky car to drive on certain circuits. The lack of optimum rear downforce seems to be the start of all problems, and the team has and are still trying to do their best to rectify this issue. One example of such an effort was the Belgian upgrade package, where the team introduced an aggressive side pods update. The aim of that update was to improve the airflow towards the Coke bottle area and the diffuser to improve rear load generation. But whatever Mercedes are trying to do with upgrades are just tiny steps, as the entire team is limited with how much changes they are able to make to the W14 within this season. When the old and new technical director of Mercedes, James Allison, was questioned on what more should the team try to improve on the W14, Allison said that the car is unpredictable and acts on opposite spectrums within seconds. James pointed out at that issue to be a fundamental one and mentioned that it's a big confidence breaker for the drivers. Bread and butter, downforce is always a good thing. We are also trying to make the car more reassuring for the drivers when they initially turn in. It feels too reactive. And then when they get to the apex, they have the opposite problem, where we want it to bite at the front and it doesn't. It's unstable when you first turn the wheel and then annoyingly dead when they get to the apex. We want it the other way around. That's what we are working on. To put Allison's comments into perspective, have you ever watched the onboards of either Lewis Hamilton or George Russell's qualifying laps? If you haven't, please do take a look, as you can see the corrections both Mercedes drivers make when they enter and exit a corner. Most corrections are mid-corner, where the car is not biting the driver's input. Either the W14 is understeering or oversteering, which results in the drivers making those sorts of corrections, resulting in a loss of lap time, and more importantly, a loss in drivers' confidence over the car. This is one area in which the Red Bull car excels, as it is apparent with how stable the RB19 is from its onboard shots. If you can remember 2020, how the W11 hustled across racetracks under the hands of Lewis Hamilton, that is how a car should feel, and that is how the current Red Bull car is. The major difference between the Red Bull and the Mercedes car, according to James Allison, is downforce. That's bread and butter in a Formula One car. Now you know what the main problem is. Now let's talk about why. Whatever Mercedes does with upgrades, they cannot solve this issue like they tried last season. There are several factors linking up to one particular reason. The most common problem that we have heard from the drivers and Allison is the lack of downforce, especially on the rear. Within the current ground effect technical regulations, nearly 60% of downforce is generated through the underfloor. There are two factors that influence the underfloor's downforce generation metric, and those two are the car's ride height and the car's suspension system. Ride height has been a big problem for Mercedes since last year. They ran the W13 super low and got into bouncing troubles. They now run the W14 a bit higher and are losing downforce. Mike Elliot admitted that the team has gone conservative with the car's ride height, as he went on to say. Simply putting downforce on the car in the medium to high speed area of the aero map. That downforce is found closer to the ground than we had developed the car in the first instance. Mercedes could now simply lower the car's ride height, but the W14 will run into porpoising issues once again, and that is due to the car's suspension system. Since 2022, Mercedes ran a conventional front and rear suspension, while Red Bull opted to run pull rods in the front, with push rods in the rear, along with anti-dive and anti-squat characteristics. Mercedes running the conventional pull rod front and push rod rear came from their early turbo hybrid era setups, where Mercedes ran a low rake design. Low rake design supports ground effect, but what the silver arrows did not account for was how stiff their suspension system was for the downforce the car was generating at lower ride heights. Mercedes carried over the same suspension setup from the W13 to the W14, and the team did not dial down the suspension stiffness due to them raising the car's ride height. Therefore, with the current Mercedes car with its rear suspension, the team can't run the car low enough to generate the optimal amounts of rear downforce to improve the car's overall stability. And making changes to the rear suspension of the car in season is close to impossible. The rear suspension attaches to crucial parts such as the gearbox casing. The gearbox design is homologated for the year according to technical regulations. So for the team to make updates to the car's rear suspension, the gearbox design should be altered accordingly, which is not allowed by the technical regulations, at least in season. This is why Mercedes are not able to improve the W14's performance and stability significantly with upgrades, as it is the fundamentals of the W14 that has to be changed. Red Bull, with their high rake designs knowledge, and with the expertise of Adrian Newey, tackled the suspension criteria perfectly, as the RB19 seems to be perfectly balanced between ride height and downforce generation. This is something Mercedes has to work on, and Allison for sure has taken note of this, as he will be making the needed suspension updates to his design for next year's W15. Also, changing the car's ride height has other complications. Aerodynamically, due to the complexity of the current generation of F1 vehicles, which are dependent on the harnessing of vortices beneath the floor, changing the ride height significantly has the effect of changing the entire aerodynamics. Mercedes does not have the option of making these alterations to the current car mid-season, but the team is considering doing so with the W15 car. Mike Elliot revealed that the team has indeed figured out the perfect ride height for their car, which effectively means that they've sorted most of their aero challenges, despite the restrictions on wind tunnel time, as he went on to say. The real difficulty is, if you look at the aero testing restrictions, you've got so limited a number of runs, and you've got to pick a direction and go for it. If you go down the route of saying, I want to develop a car for high ride height, or low ride height, and I want to be able to cover all my bases, then suddenly you'd be doing like 3 runs a week on each one and going nowhere. So you have to sort of pick a direction and go in it. Then as you learn, you can tweak that direction and move it slightly. I like to think we've sort of gotten ourselves into the right place for the winter. So what do you guys think? Is the suspension system where Mercedes are lacking most of their performance at? Very much into your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section down below. And on your way down, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get notified of our future uploads, to keep yourselves up to date about the 2023 Formula One season.